Okay, so
It
let's,
might, honestly.
let's talk a little bit about the fact that why we're here, right?
Yeah.
So Jordan and I were having dinner recently,
Yeah.
and a friend of ours, a good mutual friend of ours, had said, you sure do ask a lot of questions. And my wife said, that's just like Brandon. And then Jordan said, well, wouldn't you know, my nickname growing up was Questions.
True. I heard that a lot growing up.
And then the very next day, your friend Casey here had posted something.
Well, before that, I had joked once Kaylee said that. I said, we should start a podcast
That's true.
called Questions.
You did. Yep.
And,
That's crazy.
Then the next day, then also just for context, about a week before we had that dinner, Casey and I, we kind of have calls, every few months just to check in on
It's like
one
a
another.
board meeting, we catch up, we make decisions.
Phone sex.
Yeah, and it was sort of like the first call of the new year, and what are you excited about? What are you focused on? What's inspiring you right now? And he had mentioned wanting to do more podcast content. So Casey's already got a very well-established podcast.
Yep, 5 years in the game.
Yeah, 5 years in the game. But also, he had acquired a bunch of really fantastic IG handles that would sort of provoke inspiration in various ways, and you can maybe talk about what some of them are. But he didn't tell me what they were. I had no idea what they were. So then we have dinner like 5 days later or whatever it was. Then the next morning, and this is a terrible habit of mine, but the first thing I do when I wake up, and I know it's awful, is I grab my phone, I just look at my messages and whatever. So I grab my phone and I open up Instagram, and the first story I opened that day was Casey's story, which was like one of those Instagrams where it tags 2 accounts, and it was from @questions.
It's incredible. I mean, that's pretty wild.
It is crazy how that happened like that. Because that was like the first time I posted that as well, ever. Like, I have @questions. I had no idea what I wanted to do with it. I just acquired it. And the fact that you guys were having that conversation that before,
literally
is
the
insane.
night before.
Yeah.
It was so weird. Like, I had an outer body experience, and then immediately I called you. I was like,
No, I remember. No,
I
you
think
sent
I
me
sent it to you,
you
right?
sent me a text with a screenshot of it. You're like, you'll never believe what just happened.
yeah.
My buddy Casey just posted this. Yeah.
And then you had interest, and then I called you. I was like,
well, we got to do this. And also at the same time, this space was coming, available.
Oh yeah,
that's the.
And you're building a podcast studio.
I was telling you, I was like, I got this recording studio, but like we're building it so that we can really shoot content out of there, and podcasts would be we should do a podcast. We should do it out of there, and then the next day. So.
Very
crazy.
That's how it all came to be.
And by I too, just for context, I was looking at so many different usernames. I just find them interesting. I've been on, social media has been a huge part of my career, and I've had my podcast for 5 years. I've asked thousands of questions, and getting the handle, I had no clue what I wanted to do with it, why I was getting it, and I ended up getting it, and I'm like, oh, here we go. It's publicly posting @questions, and I would say that doesn't really happen often where you post something like a domain and there's opportunities come from that, and it's pretty.
Well, you found a good one.
Yeah,
all the ones I buy are like chihuahuabikiniwax.com. Just
Oh my god.
And what were some of the other ones that you had? Because there was like a dozen or so, right?
Yeah, it was like this the past like 2-3 months. I'm always just looking at different things from a social perspective. There's like @listener, which same thing. Like, I ask questions and I'm a listener. That's what I do in the podcasting world. And listener now turned into this podcast AI tool that I'm building, which is interesting. And then I have @acquisition, which the reason I got that was I had my company got acquired last year, and I was like, fascinated with acquisitions and learning the process, and I ended up getting that. Then I have @branding, @manifestation, just a handful.
Just
of
a bunch of them.
Yeah, a bunch of them.
But it just so happened that out of the dozen or so that you got, you posted from @questions. That day, and that was the first one I'd seen you post.
First time I ever posted on it.
So it was a very serendipitous sort of thing.
Really cool.
Yeah.
Good.
And then
and now here we are.
Yeah.
And now here we are, ready to. What do you want to talk about?
Got any questions?
You got any questions? We did talk a little bit about what we wanted to chat about today, because we've been talking on the phone, obviously, and kind of conceptualizing what it is that we want to do, and a lot of it would be basically, bringing people along on a journey of us not just talking to guests and professionals that have a lot of that we have a lot of questions for, but also just bringing some insight into their lives, bringing our own personal experiences with whatever it is that we're dealing with, and in the hopes that somebody might gain some little minuscule thing that could make them a better person in our search to become better humans ourselves.
Yeah, and I think the thing we all share, which made this make a lot of sense, is we're all just genuinely very curious people.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think it's more about, I mean, maybe we're geniuses in very, very narrow ways, but generally speaking, we're just curious people who want to learn more about kind of a broad set of topics.
Yep.
And this is sort of a great format to do that.
Yeah, I think what would be interesting just for the people to know, I know we've talked about this before, but how we all know each other outside of, you guys knew each other, then Jordan, you and I knew each other. Now we are having a podcast. I'd love to know, how did you guys initially meet?
So we met filming a show in Nashville.
Yep.
And as soon as we met, we kind of like hit it off. We had a couple ice cream dates.
We did have ice cream dates, didn't we? Yeah.
And some tequila, days. But yeah, we were in Nashville shooting a TV show. Am I allowed to talk about it?
I think so. Yeah. Let's talk about it.
Well, it's called Banded, and there'll be, but it's a musicians competition show. So it was like 5 bands, sort of like American Idol style. I was a judge. Brandon was a host.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, we spent like a month or 6 weeks in Nashville just hanging out, and we kind of hit it off. And then you and I know each other through a very good friend of mine, Jason.
Yep.
And I've been on your podcast once, I think, and yeah, we just kind of hit it off. Just also one of your good friends, Kieran, has helped out on my business, and so we have a lot of sort of mutual connections too. Yeah. Also with Frankie and Jacqueline,
many,
and there's a lot of connections there. So.
I'm hoping that this will get me a slot on his podcast one day.
Oh
yeah.
yeah.
Done. Oh, yeah, we're making it happen.
Yeah. So here we are. We all, so I helped connect the dots, and
One thing too, I think just on the idea, like before we dive into like the topic, what we want to talk about today, this idea of questions, I always think about it because, it's one thing to ask somebody questions and be curious, but I listened to a podcast recently by Rick Rubin. He just launched his podcast yesterday.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, and I forget who he had on the podcast, the first episode. Oh, Phil Jackson.
Yeah.
And
wow.
He said, I always tried to, he was kind of talking about the origin of the podcast, which we're doing right now, talking about the origin of our podcast. And he's like, I know all these cool people, we're always talking, but you'd be surprised that unless you sit down and talk to someone and have a format where you're asking them questions, like you can not learn so much about people that you spend so much time with.
Yeah.
And like sitting down in a setting and asking questions and going deep, I think that's something that is going to be super interesting and exciting for all of us to get to know you better. Like there's so many things I don't know about you and vice versa, and also with different future guests on the show. So I think there's the questions to ask the guests, there's questions to ask yourself for the viewers, for the listeners, and I think just the idea of what makes, questions is ask great questions, you get great answers, and that's what we're hopefully here to do.
And that makes a lot of sense because, I mean, I don't know how you guys feel in your lives, but I as somebody who asks a lot of questions, a lot of my friends find that can be annoying. A lot of people don't want to answer questions, or they don't want to open up, or they don't want to dig into ideas. And I always find my favorite conversations are ones where you just like go down a rabbit hole of, digging into ideas and, even if there's no personal application for them, just that act of curiosity, I find very fulfilling in my life. So.
I very much enjoy asking people questions that they don't often get asked.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yep.
I really want to see somebody's humanity revealed in front of me, no matter who it is, right?
Do you find people are uncomfortable sometimes when you ask them those
initially
things, or they don't have answers? Maybe they've never thought about it.
Yeah, or they're just not used to in that quick of a timeline to get to something that's like so deep, like a divorce they're going through, or the death in a family, or whatever, right? And like that's to me, that's where the human is in the other person that I'm dealing with. It's not in like, oh, we've had a lot of rain, haven't we? Yeah, how'd your house hold up? Well, it held up pretty good. And did that. I mean, that's fine, and I don't mind having conversations like that. But like, if it's a new person and somebody that I'm interested in and somebody that I want to get to know, I really want to.
You want to dig?
Yeah. I want to dig.
Yeah.
I want to know what they're working on that day, what they think will make them a better person that day, what they're struggling with, what they're carrying that day when they woke up and in the shower in the morning and they gave that like breath, you know, of like, God, I got to let this go or whatever it is. I want to know what those things are.
The question that I ask everybody who I'm interested in when I first meet them is like, what inspires you? What is your dream? I always ask that question. And it's remarkable how so few people have a good answer for that.
Yeah, for sure.
It's like, in my experience, anecdotally, is 5%. Right. Have a legitimate answer for what's your dream.
And in your field, that's you know, you deal with people a lot that really should have a very good answer for that. You know, I mean, an artist comes into your studio and you're like, what do you want to say to the world? Like, oh, well, I just want to make good music. You know, you better have a good answer. I mean, you know,
who are you?
Who are you?
Yeah.
What do you want to say?
Why
all right,
should
you got,
care?
you know, you've got 1 minute. I got this great beat and it's 2 minutes and 20 seconds. What are you going to say?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, what do you want to say?
And you as a musician, you know, being honest, opening up, being honest about yourself, it requires a lot of self-reflection that requires a lot of work.
Yeah. I mean, I've really appreciated, you know, since Rick Rubin released his book, you know, all the little shorts and stuff like that I've seen on.
I'm just getting into his book now.
No, it's great. I mean, it's very, and that's his whole thing is the only way to be a true artist is to get to know yourself intimately and then live that true self unapologetically. Essentially, he says it in a lot of different ways, but that's pretty much what it is, you know, not filtering your artistic expression through the filter of will people like this or will it be commercial or will it is it like this other track or I want to do what this artist is doing. It's really just getting to know what is like you at your deepest core. People will receive that as something that is unique because we are all unique and we all have a unique voice and a unique expression, and we've got these 12 notes and 26 letters that we can kind of combine in all these different ways without rules. And so that's the thing I think people gravitate to mostly in music, you know, the things that really cut through or things that are truly unique.
Yeah. But it's interesting as somebody who creates music, we should maybe all talk about our backgrounds briefly, but, you know, it's so easy to get caught in the trap of making something because you think it will be popular or you think it will be successful. And also making music is a struggle. It's just it is naturally a struggle. There's so few people who can make a living and a career out of it. So, you know, I think it's natural to want to try to do something that you think will enable you to perpetuate that career, to continue it. But then you get into, it's like a double-edged sword. You get into this trap of making things that are inauthentic. And you're right. I think as fans, we know when it feels real and we know when it feels put on.
For sure.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah. Yeah. You're right. And the best thing you can do, I mean, the pinnacle is to create something that's so unique and artistic that it gains commercial success because of its artistry.
Yeah.
Not because it's got that great beat. Not to say that, you know, great
a
beats
good beat
are fine,
works.
But it works.
But does it last?
Exactly.
Right.
I'm as someone that's not in music, obviously you guys both are. What do you think are some of the questions that artists don't ask themselves enough? I'm just curious, like hearing that, right? It's easy to say like, am I putting this out because of I want to go viral? Am I putting this out because it means, you know, it means a lot to me? Like, what are questions that you don't think people ask themselves enough in the music business?
I don't know about necessarily questions, but I think most artists want to look cool. And looking cool is ignoring often your reality. And so I feel like, because making music is kind of cool. It is a cool thing to do. But when you dig into your actual life, it's not always that cool. And there's dark sides of it. And I think a lot of artists don't necessarily want to open up in those ways. They don't want to expose themselves in those ways. And I don't think it's necessarily just an artist thing. I think it's a human thing. Like we were just saying, some people don't, they want to have those surface conversations. So what's the weather like? How was the traffic getting here? All the, you know, all the bullshit stuff. And very few people want to open up, like truly, you know, open up and expose themselves.
I love when you said that, by the way, because I think a lot of, for people that don't know, I've had my podcast for 5 years. I've done hundreds of interviews. Some of the most fulfilling relationships in my life have come from people being on the show, where you skip all of that. It's not, someone's on your show and you're asking them how the weather is. You're like, what have you struggled with? What are your biggest breakthroughs? What are you dealing with? What are you building? What are you inspired about? And then coming out of that quick 40-minute conversation, you would know so much about that person, and the depth of the relationship is much beyond just, bumping into someone at an event and getting to know them, and the casual people that you probably don't build depth.
They're not focused in those settings.
I love when you said that, because I completely agree.
Well, we talked about this a little bit maybe on the phone or something, but that was one of the things that I actually liked about the time that I've been on reality TV, is that you have these producers that are kind of forcing you to talk about issues that you normally wouldn't talk about as a family, right?
Yeah.
Which is nice. So it's kind of like this, encouraged therapy, right?
Yeah.
And
for everyone to see.
I mean, there's, listen, you got to find silver linings somewhere.
But that's like music, right?
Yeah.
Music, the idea is you want everyone to hear it, but are you willing to open up and show the darkest sides?
Yeah. I mean, I've seen great things. There's this one woman on Instagram who's a songwriter. She said, I want you to write a paragraph that nobody would read, meaning that this is totally for yourself, and nobody's going to read this. You're going to burn it right after. And now when you're done writing this thing that you don't want anybody to read, highlight the things that are the most embarrassing, and then put that in a song.
Great idea.
It's a great thing, right?
Great
I mean, that's
idea.
and that's the thing. I mean, you say, what are the questions that an artist should be asking themselves? They should obviously ask themselves why they're doing it. And it's totally okay if you just want to be on stage and be adored by thousands of people. It's totally fine. It's a legitimate reason. But if you're the artist that wants to do something a little bit more meaningful and really improve other people's lives, you have to ask yourself, what can I say to the world that nobody else can say? Because of my experiences, because of the experiences that I've had in my life, what is unique about my perspective, and how can I, as vulnerably and honestly, share that with the world in the hopes that other people might find some kind of connection and solace.
Yeah.
I love that.
And the irony is that when you put it out, there's actually millions of people who share that same experience. Absolutely. And then they really feel it and they connect to it.
Absolutely.
So.
And that's why we admire, people that are able to do that, because a lot of us lack the courage. And I say us because I feel that way often when I'm writing music too, is that we lack the courage. It's just a human thing. We lack the courage to be totally vulnerable and honest. And so when you hear somebody do that, it's really admirable. And that's why we put those people on, pedestals.
Yeah.
Speaking of vulnerability and shared experiences, I know we have some topics that we want to dive into today that I think everyone has dealt with and it has experienced throughout life. Brandon, you want to tell us about what you recently went through that led to these topics?
Let me do that. Okay. Well, so my story is that I'll spare you the details around my wife having a really scary moment with our son where there was a throttle stuck wide open on one of our vehicles, and it was a very scary experience. And so I went through that day. That was last Monday. And then that evening, our son, who was also with her in this horrific event, was sleeping in bed with us, just so we could keep a close eye on him. And that night I started to get real sick. I was like, oh, man, I got COVID. I got to go and get in the other room. So I went in the other room, and I spent a couple of days just like sleeping, as you do when you're so sick that you can't even watch TV. And it was the first time in a while, in weeks or months, that I kind of had a few days where I could slow down, and just kind of like go, you got nothing to do today but just get better, right? And that's very rare for me, especially with 3 kids. And, so I was laying there kind of in and out of sleep, and that's when a lot of ideas come to mind. Actually, I write a lot of music in that state where I'm like kind of half sleeping, or I'm just about to fall asleep and I'm in the studio, I'm in a dream, and then I force myself to get up and voice memo it, and that's how a lot of the music that I've been recording recently has come. And in that moment, I thought to myself, there are things that just really aren't serving me in my life. What are the things now that I feel so shitty? And you're just laying there and you're like going through all the stuff about like how terrible you feel for somebody that feels like this all the time with some kind of chronic disease or something, right? Like it's an awful experience. When you have your health, you have it all. It doesn't matter, all the other luxuries that we have in life really don't matter if you don't have your health. And I'm laying there with a hallucinating fever, kind of thinking to myself, like, what are the things in my life that just really aren't serving me, And you have that time to kind of filter out it's almost like a retreat where you're silent for a while and you get a chance to really reflect on yourself. And for some weird reason, this list of 5 things came to mind for me. And I think they apply to other people. And the things are caffeine, alcohol, marijuana, what's the other? Porn, and sugar. And I came up with a little acronym, CAMPS, so I can remember. So caffeine, alcohol, marijuana, porn, sugar. And marijuana I used to smoke a lot when I was a fucking kid.
Me too.
Mike, we talked a little bit about that. So for me, we'll get into that one. We could start at the top at C, but I haven't smoked marijuana in a long time, but I know that there's a lot of people out there that do. And for some reason, this felt like these 5 things are things that that often people use as recreational things, but there's a lot of people out there that are using one or more or all chronically. Mm-hmm. And
as a dependency.
Yeah, or just, whether or not you're really addicted to marijuana or caffeine or porn, whether or not it's actually like an addiction, it doesn't matter. Just using it. What does it do to you and your life force if you are using these things often, right?
Right. Yeah.
So I wanted to talk about those things, and I wanted to dive deeper and learn a little bit about what your guys' experiences with those things are, and how, whether or not you agree that some of them are either things that are serving you or not serving you in your life.
Yeah, I think it's a great...
Start at the top.
Caffeine.
Well, this one's my...
It's a tough one.
This is an easy one for me.
This one. Go ahead.
No, it's the hardest one. And
this is the easiest one for me.
Let me tell you like a couple things, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah,
let me tell you just a couple things about caffeine, like before we get into personal experiences. Pure caffeine in its raw form is like a powder. It's like a crystallized powder. It probably looks like MSG or something like that. And 1 tablespoon of it is enough to be a lethal dose.
Wow.
Wow.
And what caffeine does is block the adenosine receptors. It looks a lot like adenosine, which is a chemical in our brains and in our bodies that tells us that we're very sleepy. It builds up over time. So when you wake up in the morning, your adenosine levels are pretty low because you've been sleeping. And then as you go through the day, they get really high. It's also one of the things that contributes to our circadian rhythm. So if you pull an all-nighter, you know how like the next morning around 11 a.m., you're like, I'm kind of okay. Like I might be able to pull this off. But then in the afternoon, you're like,
hit the wall.
Done. It's because the adenosine levels also do kind of go with this circadian rhythm. That's the thing that has kind of created this rhythm in your body.
Yeah.
So they will naturally kind of deplete in that morning, even if you haven't slept. And then they're going to ramp up in the afternoon. So that's part of the reason why. So caffeine looks a lot like like the chemical adenosine, and so it blocks the receptors in your brain. So basically it allows that to build up in your body. It gives you a high because now none of that adenosine is actually getting into your system, so you feel like you're not sleepy. But then once that wears off, once the half-life, and the caffeine starts to break down, you now get a big rush of adenosine, and that's what creates a crash.
Right.
It accelerates bone loss in postmenopausal women. That's one thing that I had read. There's a big correlation between caffeine and anxiety disorders with people. So people that have anxiety or are prone to panic attacks, caffeine makes it a lot worse. So like one of the worst things you can do is be on Xanax and be drinking coffee. Like you're somebody who's prescribed Xanax. They're just like, it's a terrible thing for you to be doing, right?
Okay.
And you probably wouldn't even need the Xanax if you just fucking quit the caffeine, right? If you just quit the Starbucks thing, right? And also, this one really kind of jumped out at me. Studies in rats have shown that it may permanently alter the brain's excitability. So you're
less excitable.
Yes.
If you drink a lot or if you have a lot of
caffeine. If you've been using it for a long time.
Got it.
Then your brain has become dependent on releasing all the chemical kind of things that happen when you drink coffee and the way it makes you feel good and it does all this stuff, that without it, you can actually have a difficulty exciting your brain meaning exciting your body, feeling passionate about things, feeling like you want to go for that run, feeling like, all those things, it could actually permanently deplete your brain's ability to become excitable. Which I thought was pretty interesting.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the anxiety thing, I was thinking, I couldn't help but think about these young kids, because it talks a little bit about how younger kids are far more susceptible to developing anxiety. And I mean, I see 12-year-olds walking with this big ass ice blended, just I'm going like, dude, I mean, walking across the street with their friends, like, man, I'm just drinking Starbucks. 4 shots.
Yeah,
it's the
thing,
cool
and they
thing.
I mean, but it really is like, fortunately, it's not caffeine, and coffee was not something that I started drinking until I was an adult. But like, that it's kind of freaky.
Yeah. For young. So do you guys drink coffee yourself currently?
So since
or use caffeine?
Since I was sick, I haven't been. And right now I'm in this really scary window where I had 10 days of drinking no caffeine at all. And now I'm feeling good. I'm feeling back to myself. And honestly, I feel like a little bit of that, like the excitable thing, where like I feel like I'm a little bit numb unless I'm like, I want to go and get my little matcha. I was drinking matcha before I got sick and I stopped. I actually had one yesterday, and it didn't. It's that thing. It's like not smoking weed for a long time, and then you get stoned. You're like, wait, I don't really like this. But then a few hours later, you're like, I want to do it again though.
Yeah.
It kind of is like that,
Yeah.
For me. So I'm weaned off of caffeine right now, and I tried yesterday to kind of use it in like a moderate way, but I'm more inspired now to just really be off of it.
Does caffeine affect you in a positive way, in your opinion, or what does it do to you that makes you come back to it? Because I'll say I usually drink 2 cups of coffee a day.
Mm-hmm.
It's been something I've been doing more recently that I know I should take a break. But I don't look at it as a negative thing, nor does it make me feel negative. And I'm curious, what it does to you. And then I would love to expand.
No, it's a great. Obviously, people are different. They even did studies. I read that they took twins, different types of twins, and they basically did studies on the way that caffeine affects them. And twins that are identical, or they have a different word for it, but I think that's what they mean, that share the same genes, caffeine affects them the same way. Whereas twins that have some genetic differences, caffeine affects them differently. So it is different for people, right? We do feel the effects, or it does shape our personality in different ways. Yes, I would say that caffeine, I love it. I love the feeling of
I got my coffee right here.
I love the feeling of feeling hyper focused on something. Right? And I think that's kind of what it does. It gives me energy.
Yep.
And it makes me feel like I'm getting a lot done. I also think that a lot of that is an illusion. Yeah. I really do. I think a lot of that is an illusion. I think that we think that we're getting a lot of stuff done because it's like somebody that smokes meth, and uses there's a lot of really functional meth heads out there. No, but there are. There's
caffeine heads are little meth heads.
I guarantee you there are some functional meth heads out there that have been using it for decades probably, and they've got the most incredible model planes in their house, right? Or something like that, right?
But so you love caffeine for the how it makes you feel productive, let's say.
I do, and I don't. I remember being young and experimenting with caffeine, overloading on it,
22.
College.
Okay.
When I was in college, I remember being probably your age and being oh, I'm gonna make a cup of coffee. People drink this, right? And an instant cup of coffee, and just being on the floor, oh my god, shaking, this is awful. I feel terrible. So.
Was that when you started drinking coffee in college?
No, I probably still didn't even drink it then because I was like, I don't like this. I don't like the way it makes me feel.
So I'll say I've never had even a sip of coffee in my entire life.
You're
seriously
joking. Here, right here,
no,
brother.
No, we're not.
Wow.
I have never had
this
a
is why
sip
he's so
of coffee.
successful
he was
and
holding that
productive
one in.
and all that
Well,
stuff.
I was letting I wanted to hear your guys' thoughts on it.
But you love Red Bull.
No. I don't drink.
Wait, never.
I don't
had
drink
coffee or caffeine. Just coffee.
I mean, I've had soda growing up. You can't avoid caffeine.
Yeah.
Growing up, when you're 8 years old, you go to McDonald's, get a Happy Meal, you're gonna get a Coke, right? But now in my life, actually for the last probably 15 years, I don't drink soda, I don't drink tea, I don't drink coffee. if I have a Red Bull, it's so rare, and it's never by itself. It's if I'm out having a drink. I'm like, and I haven't had a vodka Red Bull in probably 3 years. I'm on tequila now, but yeah. So I basically get no caffeine. It'd be interesting to see. I have an identical twin as well, but he also doesn't drink caffeine. So I don't know what the
I didn't know
what
you had an
differences are
identical
there.
twin.
I
Yeah,
do.
yeah.
Yeah.
An
Identical twin.
Why did I not know that? What?
I don't know. This is what questions is about.
If he gets
dig.
busy and we need a replacement,
this
for
is
him,
great to
it'll
know.
be great.
No,
Yeah,
seriously.
it's very
Absolutely.
useful for us.
Absolutely.
Wow. So no coffee.
No coffee, no caffeine at all. And for me, I mean, I've tried to psychoanalyze, like, why have I never drank coffee? All my friends drink coffee. Everyone drinks it. I don't like the smell of it. And I think the reason why is when I was younger, I went to a high school that was somewhat far, actually from 8th grade. I went to a school that was like somewhat far away. And so I had to wake up early in the morning and take a public transit bus to school. So I'd be up at like 6:30 in the morning. And when you're, 12 years old or 13 years old, waking up at 6:30 in the morning, you're like, you're completely dead. And the first smell that I would smell in the morning would be the pot of coffee that my mom put on for herself.
Right.
And I think I created a negative sort of connotation to coffee in my brain of having that feeling of waking up and feeling miserable and smelling that. Yeah. And then, as I got older, like seeing, people who drink too much coffee, like, especially like coffee and cigarettes. I've also never smoked a cigarette in my life either. But that, like, the bad breath, the teeth, all that stuff, I was like, I want no parts of that.
Wow.
I just never really needed it. All I drink is water. And I'm pretty wired most of the time, so I don't know.
Yeah, your energy, I mean, you don't need it.
We don't need it.
Yeah.
That's the thing, is like we really don't need it.
But maybe that's because maybe my energy is higher because I've never really exposed myself to caffeine in that way.
Probably. Yeah. I do know in my experiments with caffeine, that when I go for a long period of time, and I mean it like it takes a month, I've even said it takes 3 months to get back to feeling like, oh my God, I am so much better off now than I was when I was having that afternoon pick-me-up coffee.
Right.
Like way better energy level-wise. Like I can just, I feel like doing push-ups in any waking hour. Like I got all this energy. I feel passionate. I feel all that stuff. It takes a while.
Yeah.
I really think it does. And I do believe, I mean, at least in my life, the people that have gone through their lives that are like, oh, I've never had coffee, most of the time, those people have like great energy.
Yeah.
They just do.
I agree.
They just do.
Right here.
Like yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I have no desire either. Like, when I'm out at, you go out to a nice restaurant and at the end they're like, do you want espresso, whatever, you kind of want to participate, but I'm just like, nah, just give me that chocolate dessert.
No tea.
Sugar is my fix.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
I have a sweet tooth, although I'm getting
we'll get to that. That's last.
dodging that, yeah.
And also, like, my last point on coffee is I feel like I do need to take a break because I don't drink coffee. This is what I tell myself. Maybe I'm lying to myself. I say, I'm not addicted to it. If I take a couple of days off, which I have done, which is rare.
Is that filled with coffee right now?
It was like up to here. This is coffee though. Yeah. But
it's a big coffee, bro.
1 cup. It's just.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But I usually wake up. The first thing I do is I make a cup of coffee. I drink my water, and then I drink coffee while I read a book for usually like 45 minutes. And it just is more of like a part of the routine, and I enjoy it. Like I enjoy black coffee, just the flavor of it. I don't add any sugar. I don't add any sweeteners. Like I don't do it for that reason. And I just enjoy it. Like even like I could switch it to decaf, and I think it would still be good for me.
Are you a connoisseur? Are you like? Because I
love
a foodie.
the pour over. My friend has a large coffee company. I'm like, I've been to Costa Rica and to a coffee plantation, and I enjoy the art of
the nuances
coffee.
of different.
Yes,
I love the smell of weed, but you don't see me smoking it.
Yeah, exactly, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's we can love these things that
Yeah.
aren't good for us,
Totally.
or aren't serving us in the best ways.
Yeah.
I have something for you, by the way, because I've also found something that has really replaced coffee in a wonderful way. My wife, coffee drinker every morning for a long time. And finally, through seeing me, I was like, I could talk to her about it all I want, would never convince anything. But like her seeing me quit caffeine and kind of getting back to this place of like high level energy and all that stuff, inspired her to try to quit. She won't touch the stuff. I mean, she looks at the back of like ingredients on all these different like, protein shakes, stuff like that, to make sure that they're not spiking it with anything. Because she's like, I cannot touch it. I don't touch the caffeine.
How long has she been off?
6 months, maybe something.
Oh,
like
wow.
that. Yeah.
Dude, great job.
Yeah. I mean, done. She's just like, I'm done.
You said I have something for you. Is that
Oh,
something
it's
we can
this.
talk about?
Yeah. It's great. It's we discovered it because of my buddy that doesn't drink coffee, and he was like, "Oh, try this stuff called rasa," and it's like adaptogenic tea. Basically, it's mushrooms and chicory and all these things that don't have any caffeine in it, and you French press it, which is great.
Wow.
So you put it in the French press. We had it this morning.
Nice.
I'd love to give it a try.
Yeah, it's great. It's great, and it gives you that ritual, right?
Yeah.
Because I know what you mean. I love the ritual too. It's like
Yep.
we love to. My wife we used to like make coffee at the time and go sit out and sip it and look at the sunrise and all that stuff. It's fantastic. It's nice to have a warm beverage like that in the morning.
Yeah.
I
But there's
agree.
other options.
Yeah, good to know.
Yeah,
So let's talk about alcohol. Number 2.
alcohol.
What did you learn about alcohol?
Well, it's a depressant. I mean, that's like the first thing you see on Wikipedia. This is all very,
Broad,
surfacey
very surface
research,
stuff. Yeah. We're not scientists here. We're just curious.
Right. But it is a depressant. The World Health Organization ranks it as the highest risk group carcinogen, and that they say that no amount is safe.
No amount.
No amount.
All right.
Squamous cell carcinoma of the esophagus, tonsil cancer, and breast cancer are the leading causes, like the leading cancers that you would develop from drinking alcohol.
Interesting.
Which is very interesting because also, I've been trying to think, differently about alcohol, or whenever you learn something, you kind of your perspective changes on something, and it really is like it's not just a solvent, a very good solvent, because it's fat soluble and water soluble, but it's also a disinfectant. I mean, when you're taking alcohol and you're pouring it down into your, when it touches anything, it's going to disinfect it. But you have all this good bacteria that goes all the way down.
I've heard that, like mouthwashes. You don't. I've heard.
Yeah. Potentially.
You don't want to mouthwash.
I don't know much about it, but yeah, but I've heard that as well. So, putting it into your body and doing that is not a very good thing. And it's kind of it's like, I wouldn't want to smoke a cigar because you're probably going to get mouth cancer or throat cancer or something like that. Well, you probably also wouldn't want to be throwing back disinfectant, and letting it run down your esophagus, because
whiskey on the other
squamous cell carcinoma of the esophagus is the leading cause. And then I did also hear somebody talk a little bit about how alcohol is water soluble and fat soluble, which isn't always the case with compounds. And so what that basically means is that you have your cell, alcohol has the ability to pass right through that cell, whereas so many other things that we ingest into our body just attach to receptors and get on the cell wall, but alcohol actually has the ability to pass through it. So it is going to affect all of your cells in your body on at their most foundational level. Like they're actually going to pass through the cell. So you think about it, that alcohol gets into your body and it spreads. It doesn't stay contained in like one area, like in your stomach, and then it goes to your kidneys or whatever. It gets into your blood. It spreads throughout your entire system and affecting every single cell on your body.
Yeah. So, I mean, what are your guys' experience with alcohol? I mean, we've all drank. We all probably still do drink. We just had some margaritas the other day.
Yeah.
I've never abused alcohol. At most when you're in high school and you start experimenting and you're hanging out with friends and going out, I feel like at least of our era, that was probably the case. You abuse it a little bit, and at least for me, I learned my boundaries and learned my limits. Yep. And by the time I was out of college, it's very, very, very rare where I have like a night where I get very intoxicated. So
I agree.
Yeah, I've always been a relatively healthy drinker. I think, obviously,
I like alcohol though.
Get fucking trashed in middle school, or whatever.
No, I think,
like in high school and stuff like that, and maybe a couple times in college. But by the time that was, go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think my perspective is unique because I didn't go to college. I'm 22. I grew up one of three. I have two older brothers, and I saw them. They went to college. They ended up dropping out, and I just never liked what was happening when they were drinking and they'd come home. And I think that instilled in me, like, hey, I don't want to go drink all the time. I've definitely drank, but it's so weird. Like, I'm 22 and I have no desire to go drink when I go out. And I'm doing
How
this.
old are your brothers?
25 and 28.
And were they both partied and drank more? And
For sure. Way more than me. And I never went to college, never had that experience of going to college and turning up. I've had my fair share of like incredible nights out in different clubs, but very rare. And like for me right now, just for context, I'm doing this mental toughness challenge and I'm on day 46 of 75. It's called 75 Hard. And part of the program is you can't have any alcohol. And I think this year in 2023, I've probably had like 1 or 2 drinks for like New Year's and then like maybe 1 drink in February.
Yeah.
And I felt the last year for me, like my just care to drink or grab a drink, a cocktail has just dwindled super naturally to the point where coming out of this program, I know that I might go the whole year not drinking. And I just feel that way right now, which I think is unique just from the lack of like, oh, you go out on Friday, you have a drink, like that ritual. If you just remove that ritual for a long extended period of time, which I'm curious to try personally from a caffeine perspective, that has been the case for me when it comes to alcohol.
My thing with alcohol is I'm very much a social drinker. So if I go out and I'm with friends and we go to have dinner, I'll have a cocktail or two. You know, I'll have a tequila or something like that. But I'm never, there's not a point in my life at this point where I'm like, I want to go out and just get shit-faced.
Of course, no. I would hope not. Jeez.
Yeah. But no, but you know, every once in a while you're in Vegas for the weekend, you know, you might have a night. And I think that's you know, reasonably okay, but generally speaking that's like few and far between at this point. But also I think there's a different thing in era cuz my nephew is your age. And the way that my brother and I grew up, and maybe this is similar to you as well cuz we're closer in age. I'm 38. Is like my nephew doesn't drink. He doesn't do any drugs. He doesn't, you know, he's very much like a really just good kid. And I think because he grew up in a social media world where, you know, there was way more distractions.
The vices are not alcohol, but dopamine.
Whereas for us, we didn't have, you know, smartphones. So it was like, well, what are you doing tonight? Well, let's just go out and get a 6-pack and drink. So I wonder if the timing of it,
I think that
generations.
Is true. Like, a lot of my girlfriend she's 29, I'm 22, and she's always like, none of your friends drink. Like 22, 23, 24. Like some of my closest friends, they've never picked up a drink in their life. They've never had alcohol, and that blows my mind. But I've heard that so often from like close friends of mine, and I think it's, to your point, extremely fair in terms of, I believe, you know, growing up, I've never smoked a cigarette in my life as well, and you know, you saw all these ads like cigarettes are terrible, the whole thing. And granted, my dad worked he still does in Philip Morris Tobacco, and he never touched cigarettes. And I learned so much about tobacco early on.
Wow.
And I look at it where kids at my age or younger tend to see alcohol like cigarettes back in the day. And I think there's a shift just happening, at least for the majority of just alcohol as a whole. And there's a responsible aspect to drinking and, you know, all the different ways. But in terms of like going and getting blacked out drunk is nowhere where people want to be, I think, versus what my brothers and what I saw in them when they were going to college and turning up and doing all that stuff.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you say that, but now we're seeing, and, you know, not to necessarily move this on right away, but with marijuana, now we're seeing legalization, not just in America, but in countries around the world, is starting to become more of a thing. Why do you think that is, that alcohol is sort of being pushed to the side, but there's probably more people smoking marijuana, right? I don't know if that's actually true or not, but it's certainly become more acceptable.
Mm-hmm.
Totally.
I don't know.
You know, tobacco, I didn't put on this because I feel like it really is it's not a situation in my life, right? It's not something ideal.
I've never,
and I doubt that there's that many people, especially young people, that are really dealing with tobacco. I actually at one point I did think about nicotine.
Yep.
Putting it on there. It's just not really in my wheelhouse. So like I don't. Right. So I don't know how many people there are, but hopefully if you're vaping nicotine,
I think I can solve the little
let's just agree that it's probably not a good idea.
Yeah.
Let's just agree that that's just...
People walk around just glued to the vapes.
Yeah,
it's crazy.
That's insane.
Well, now they're all getting like
Banned.
recalled
Yep.
and banned, right?
My dad, he's told me over the years, like Philip Morris acquired Juul, like was one of their worst investments ever, and just the research about they call it popcorn lungs through the vapes, by far so bad compared to, and you hear it all
Even
the time,
regular cigarettes.
Yeah, you'll smoke a vape, it's like the equivalent of like downing 5 packs of cigarettes back to back chain smoking in terms of like the equivalent of lung damage. Don't quote me on that, but
that's lovely.
It's absurd.
I have one quick story. My mom and her dad went to go do a life scan, which was like a thing where they take like a MRI of your whole body, like all the way your torso. And my mom never smoked in her life. Her dad, my grandpa, did a lot for a lot of years. Quit, of course, but smoked for 30 years. Oh my God. His lungs compared to hers going through this life scan thing was incredible. He had holes in his lungs. I swear that were this. It looked like Swiss cheese.
Wow.
It looked like Swiss cheese. His lungs did just deteriorated stuff. I mean, it was incredible to see. And when I saw that, I literally was like, "Oh, this is terrible. Like that's so bad for your lungs. It takes it's deforming. It deforms your lungs. Yeah. It takes such a physical toll.
Crazy.
But marijuana.
Okay, marijuana. Tell us about marijuana.
Tell us about.
Tell us everything.
I didn't look anything up. Because I have a lot of personal experience with marijuana, because from like 13 to 30, aside from taking like a couple breaks, like I remember one time I dated a girl that got mad at me because I was so addicted to smoking weed, and I quit for like 9 months or something like that. I think it was the longest I had gone.
It's amazing what girls can make us do.
Yeah, I know, right? God, that's why I don't let them. They don't make any decisions in my life anymore. But basically from 13 to 30, I was a very, very big marijuana smoker. Like, that's how I learned how to smoke. My older brother was a big stoner and was like, we wake up to bong loads and, ripping bong. And that's just kind of like what I did. And it was most of the time always based around activity. So it was like, we're going to get stoned and then go ride our dirt bikes. We're going to get stoned and go do this. We're going to get stoned and go work out. It was always an upper for me.
Yeah.
And I used it as like, this is going to be more fun stoned kind of thing, right? It was always that, and just did that for a long time. And I wasn't 30. I think I was a little younger than 30. I think I was like 29. But I just literally hit a wall with it. Like I think a lot of it was anxiety. It was, if I hadn't smoked weed for a little while and I would get stoned, obviously I'd get like, sometimes I get too high and I'm like, I'm fucking too high. Like, I don't like this. This is like, I'm anxious. I'm
paranoid
and then for some reason, I had just been using it for so long that over the course of a couple of years, it had kind of switched to like, when I'm stoned, I'm totally comfortable. When I'm not, I'm really anxious.
Interesting.
So I would start to get anxious as I was not, and then I would get stoned to be like, okay, I feel like more relaxed and better again. So for some reason that switched, and it all came to a head where I remember laying on my couch in Santa Monica, where I was living at the time, and laying on the couch face down, just being like, dude, you feel awful. Like, why are you doing this to yourself? Like, why are you doing this to yourself? You just feel terrible. I know.
You were smoking every day?
Yeah.
Multiple times a day?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So it was like pretty much you were high all day.
Pretty much. Yeah. Small windows where I wasn't, but I had tried so many times to be like a Saturday smoker, be like, if I could just smoke as for me, never worked. I mean, you
grew up in Malibu.
Yeah.
Beautiful weather. It's like you want to sit and stare at the beach and like, I
was good. The only time I was good when I was like smoking weed was like maybe for a couple hours in the morning. I could push that and like breakfast or something. I could be like fine, like waking up and getting a few things and doing this and doing that. And then, but like by, mid morning, I'm like, let me get stoned.
Ready to have one.
Yeah.
But for you, because I think I totally relate where I won't dive in too much right now, but when you say like the productive aspect of smoking weed, I don't smoke weed at all anymore, but I was recently watching, I saw an interview with Seth Rogen, and he talked about like he smokes weed every day, and a lot of his obviously ideas, the creativity stem from, he believes, him smoking weed, and it's like he would never stop. Like, what are your guys' thoughts on the quote unquote productive stoners?
I literally just heard the other day that there was some study that was done, and they said that they've discovered that drugs do not increase a person's creativity at all. He's just a really funny guy who happens to be smoking weed.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah,
there's
for
no
sure.
way. I mean,
Well,
he's just a really silly, funny guy. If you asked his parents, like, what was Seth Rogen like as a 6-year-old? They're like, oh, he was hilarious, like he is now. He's just a funny guy. He's just loves
here's what
to
I'll
smoke
say about
weed.
that though. So as a music creator, and you create music too,
Yeah,
so you get it. So I started smoking weed when I was 13. It was like when you're 13, it's like where you can get it, and then by the time I was 16, I was smoking every day. And then when I was 17, and I started getting into other things like shrooms and stuff like that. When I was 17, I quit cold turkey, had a bad shroom trip, and that just killed everything. But there was a reason, because I felt like I was naturally relatively intelligent. I did fairly well at school without really having to try that hard. And I noticed that I just didn't care anymore. And as soon as I stopped smoking weed, I quit cold turkey after a bad shroom trip. I totally put all of my energy into music. And that's a big reason why I was able to find success in music, because I was so laser focused on it, and I didn't smoke. Then I started smoking, and I still smoke every once in a while now. Like, I have a very comfortable relationship with it. I don't get into a habit of overuse of it. But I do find that sometimes, and it depends on the type of weed I smoke, sometimes I'll smoke some weed and then it'll be 2 a.m. and I'm like, I have to sit and make music right now. And it will create a jolt of inspiration.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not that I can't do it when I'm not high, but different types of ideas come when you're high, a different flavor of idea. And that I can understand for a lot of people why that can be incredibly valuable for their creativity.
Yeah, I can understand that. It's perspective, right? I love the analogy that psychedelics, I'm not saying that weed is really categorized as psychedelic, but it's something that gives you different perspective, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you do get stoned and you're like, whoa, people are monkeys, or whatever it is, right? Psychedelics and drugs are great for clearing the fog so that you can see what's on the other side of the river, but they do nothing to actually build the bridge to get there. And so weed, drugs can be very, very useful to discover things about yourself, to gain different perspective on a song or on a way of writing something. I don't discount that. I think that they can be. I, believed that wholeheartedly, and that's why I was always stoned making music too, right?
Yeah.
One of my favorite things was to get stoned and like have a beer and sit in front of the computer and just be like, I'm just gonna make stuff
tweak.
tonight.
Yeah.
I don't disagree, but what we're talking about here, I also don't. I think that rather than getting stoned, you could also probably meditate or do some different things.
Creative writing.
Yeah, there's probably a lot of other things that would improve your creativity more than marijuana. I'm just saying. I'm just putting that out there as as a possibility. But what we're talking about really also is chronic use of anything.
Yeah,
And
true,
I think if I were to say on this list of the things that is the least like dangerous or the thing that you could use recreationally, it'd probably be marijuana.
Yeah.
On here, on this list, like that's the one thing that I think is probably the most harmless.
Yeah. I agree, and I mean, you guys are in the music space, and I think like one experience and story that I remember was, so Wiz Khalifa and his manager Will Dezonbach, they were investors in my company Media Kits, and we had this big launch party in August of 2021. Wiz Khalifa performed, and before we go out, like my mom's there, my brothers are there, and we're in the back room getting super high, and like this is before I'm doing a speech, and there's all this stuff.
Oh god, that's a different type of high when you're with Wiz.
And no, my mom, like she hasn't smoked weed in so long, if not ever. And I remember my mom was talking to him, just like, oh, like smoking weed.
Are you telling me your mom got high with Wiz Khalifa?
No, I wish, but she did not.
That's
but
a cool mom.
maybe just through the the small room, and it was a hot box session.
Yeah.
But someone like Wiz, who I respect from a business perspective, from a musician perspective, like he's working out, super healthy, but he smokes weed every day, and it's that the weed makes him be more productive. He just enjoys it, and I think someone that like him or Snoop Dogg or someone that like puts weed on such a pedestal, it just, everyone has their different use of it, and obviously in the music space and music business, it can be glorified, where there's a lot of people that are just smoking weed and not doing anything with their lives, and they'll see these people and say, oh, if I smoke weed every day, then I can be productive. When you're just a lazy, unmotivated person.
Yeah.
And it's easy to just
a lot of it's a feeling though. So when I started my career, I was in New York City and I was an engineer for rappers, and one of my first clients was Fabulous, who's still a friend of mine. And in rap sessions, you're in a big studio. Very rarely is it just you and the artist. It's like you, the artist, and like 20 of their friends.
Mm-hmm.
And the drinks and the weed especially, it just changes the vibe in the room, and that might be the feeling that you want to sort of portray in the music, and so it makes it easier to sort of get into that zone and write that type of record,
Mm-hmm.
if that's the case. And I can't tell you how many times I sat in, rap sessions where just the contact high was just out of this world, and I'm trying to sit there and like not fuck up, and it's very challenging to do that. But yeah, I mean, sometimes it's just a matter of like putting yourself in a space where your mind thinks in just a slightly different enough way to say, let me get that idea out.
I agree. That's
pointing it in a direction,
Yeah. So much problem solving, so much like the people that are able to problem solve really well, engineers, all that stuff, are ones that are able to look at the problem from a different angle.
Yeah.
And I think weed can definitely do that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It can give you this different perspective.
Although I didn't want to be high in those sessions because I was just like, let me just really be on point right now.
Yeah.
It was early in my career. I didn't want to mess up.
Of course.
So.
Yes. But there's a lot of chronic use of it. There's a lot of people that are doing it every day. There's a lot of people that are doing it, pretty consistently. And I don't think it's good. I also think that it does, but I do believe that any kind of use of drugs probably, but marijuana falls into this category. You're stunting your emotional growth when you're using something like that every day. You're not allowing your body to really process the things that need to be processed.
Yeah.
It also has a big effect on your sleep. I will tell you that, because I spent a lot of time smoking weed and then not smoking weed and just experimenting in those, 2 decades of smoking weed. And whenever I got to about the 2-week mark of quitting, I started dreaming like crazy. And my brother and I, we used to talk about it too. We'd be like, dude, are you dreaming? And you're like, oh yeah. Like,
yeah.
I mean, you really do not dream when you're like smoking weed consistently and sleeping. You might like the first couple, if you get stoned and then you're like, well, I had the craziest dreams last night, but if you're doing it every day and smoking a lot, you're not dreaming. And that is really important. I just think sleep is a very, very important thing in our lives.
Speaking of that, how do you feel about marijuana with sleep? Because I found in my life today, I don't smoke weed recreationally. I don't go out and smoke weed ever. But I will either smoke a little bit or have an edible at night, and it really helps me sleep. And the reason for this is before I started doing that, and again, I don't drink caffeine or whatever, like you can talk to me, like ask Jason about this. I was wired. I would be up all night till 6 a.m. and I would be able to operate on 4 hours of sleep and wake up and be ready to go and put a full 20-hour day in of work and not leave the studio. And it got really it got to a point where I was like, I need to be sleeping more. And weed helped actually regulate my sleep habits. Like I take a 10 milligram edible or something like that, and in an hour I'm just like out like a light. And
maybe I know that there's things that help you fall asleep, but they're not actually beneficial for the sleep itself.
Yeah.
So I honestly don't know how that falls in, if it falls into that category. I mean, I'm pretty sure that any sleep aid probably isn't good for you.
Yeah.
Well,
if it works, it works. Yeah. I've never taken. I never really want to get into those things, but
probably a lot better to
like
do weed than Ambien.
Yeah, just a nice
probably
chill.
A lot better to take a natural gummy edible.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well,
onto your favorite subject.
You've been talking about this a lot. We've heard a lot about it.
Sugar.
The P,
I mean
the porn.
Oh, the porn. Oh, right. Sorry, I have it written down wrong here, so I keep getting thrown off. I came up with the acronym after I had done the list. So. Okay, yeah.
Camps. We're at P for
Capums. Capums is what I have here. Porn, right? Okay, so porn. Well, we obviously are it's at our fingertips all the time. It's been around since the beginning of time. Like people have had there's examples of like archaeological digs that have revealed, you know, types of pornographic materials and stuff from as early as like 35,000 years ago. I mean, it's been around for a long time. Obviously,
stone carvings.
Obviously, the internet.
Yeah.
The internet has changed things a lot, like it has with social media and all these other things. You know, what is that really doing to our brain? For some reason, I like have decided in my most recent in my relationship that I'm in now with my wife, which is my current relationship. For some reason, from the very beginning, I just didn't have the desire to watch porn. I was just very fulfilled. I was like, oh, I love my wife. I'm very attracted to her. And I had the energy that I had, that sexual energy that I had to like offer the world that was, that is like, you know, ripe for the picking. I wanted to be directed at her. Like I wanted it to be something that was going to elevate our relationship. Poor girl, you know, because I got a lot of it. No. You know, almost to the point, you know, where it can where it's something to battle with. It almost became a bit of a battle where it was just like, you know, I have all this energy, you know, having kids and stuff like that. Obviously, we're not, you know, there's periods of time where it's like we're not, you know, rabbits, right? So, you know, it has become like a bit of a challenge, and things that I've that I've reconciled with, like, oh, is this an important thing to be able to like take care of that energy on my own, or should I keep kind of pouring it into my wife, even though it's not always received the way that I would like it to be. But for some reason, the idea of like watching porn doesn't sound like it would be beneficial. And then there was a podcast that I was listening to at one point where there was a love therapist on there, or therapists. They were talking about love and marriage and all that stuff. And she did mention some studies where those who watch porn consistently are less attracted to their partner. So it actually does diminish the attraction that you have towards your partner, which is kind of like the feeling that I was feeling all on my own, and then was validated by what I had heard in that moment. And so, you know, obviously people are in different places of their lives.
Partner porn, does that change it?
Like watch as a couple, you mean?
Or things that maybe you've created or whatever. You know what I'm saying? Like if you're you know, apart from, like, for example, when we were in Nashville, like, I don't know, like, how do you maintain the intimacy then if you don't want to go outside of, you know, the relationship? You know, you're away for 6 weeks. What, you know?
Honestly, I'm looking. It's like the carrot at the end of the road. It's like I'm just thinking about when I get home.
Yeah.
You know, I'm just like focused on. I mean, we were pretty busy when we were there. I was, you know, most of the trips that you and I did were relatively short. We were never there for like more than a few days, kind of a thing, right?
Well, the first trip was like 2 weeks, I think, but yeah.
I don't think for me. I don't think I was.
That's right. You left after.
I did shorter trips.
You did
so I was never. Yeah. If it was 2 weeks or something like that, I don't know. It's a good point. And see that, you know, that brings us to the fact that there are so many other people that are in different situations. I mean, I'm a married person with somebody who I love and admire and am attracted to. You know, there are single people out there. This can span across. I mean, this can affect people in so many different ways, and their relationship with their own sexual energy is going to be very different depending on whatever situation they're in. All I know is for me, which is my personal experience, is that for some reason, something that I've never had a problem with, meaning a problem watching porn and using it as an, you know, something to enhance my sexual energy at times, that I've never really had a problem with it. But for some reason, when I found myself in a relationship where I wanted that energy to be focused into somebody, I had no desire. For it.
Yeah. No, it makes a lot of sense, and I feel the same way. Like, you've met my girlfriend Colette, and like when we started dating, I found myself not really interested in exploring porn. An interesting question is with social media now, especially during the pandemic when people were very disconnected, you know, there wasn't really a lot of ways for people all around the world to sort of express their sexual energy. So I'm sure there was a lot. I'm sure if you saw the internet charts, those porn sites were crushing it during the pandemic. So I wonder, with people watching so much porn and also like a hyper sexualized version of sex, right? Like, we were talking earlier, like the step brother thing, like all these crazy scenarios that just are not realistic. What does that do to someone's brain? Yep. With how, their relationship with sex and intimacy and things like that.
Yeah.
We're also dealing with demographic changes like around the world. I mean, there's a lot of talk about, just using China as an example, where they had that one kid policy for a long time, and they have a lot more men than they do women, or, there's quite the imbalance.
Aging populations, like there's less, there's the birth rate's dropping in a lot of places. So I wonder if that's...
We're in a situation where there are going to be people, and I'm not too familiar with the term incel but like there's people out there that are basically have just decided that they're going to be celibate, right?
Well, incel is involuntarily, right? They don't decide, they're forced.
Celibate.
Yeah.
But that seems like something that is probably
a byproduct of,
maybe, or it's just going to be on the rise a little bit as we isolate into these different like worlds, potentially. And
then we go into VR and things like that, and it's like you can almost, like, you can't recreate the intimacy, but you can kind of recreate the experience in many ways as tech sort of continues. Like, does that just make it easier for people to say, I don't want to deal with the shit of a relationship, because we all know there's always shit in some ways. I'd rather just like get this like maybe lower version of the benefit on one side, and then just be, I know a lot of friends who just prefer being single. They don't, they're not so interested in monogamy and
but they're getting laid probably. These are also friends that probably fit into the category of, with like some of these apps, from what I've heard is that the imbalance, like the inequality, begins to kind of really get into these apps where it's like there's like a handful, like let's just say you're a guy, right? There's making up numbers, there's 1,000 men on there. Well, there's 25 women that want to like sleep with somebody that night.
Oh yeah,
and
the numbers are skewed.
Yeah, and then the next day, those same 1,000 men are still on there, and it's maybe a different 25 women or something like that.
Yeah.
But the same 25 guys, more or less, are the ones that are going to get it, because on their profile, it's something that's appealing.
Yeah.
And so they're going to literally just kind of go for the top of the pyramid and like, what's the best I can find? What's the best I can find? And so you end up creating like this inequality even within these dating apps and stuff, where a handful of guys are getting laid consistently, and then there's a whole the masses, a vast majority of them aren't, right? So you might have friends that are single, but these might also be friends
of course they're
that are fitting into this category where it's like relatively, easy for them to be able to still have sex, but not have to commit.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting one. I mean,
do
you have anything?
I agree with you. I mean, with you, Brandon, I've been in a relationship for 3 years now. I'm 22, right? So
he's got a lot of testosterone.
Right? Yeah, for sure. And I think just being in a relationship that is fulfilling, that is you're sexually attracted to your partner, that desire to watch porn has diminished and more so disappeared over the past 3 years significantly. And I also think too, when there's moments of, which is rare, but like when we're apart, that whole thing, I was just Googling it, but this, I first read this in the book Thinking Grow Rich years ago, and it's called sexual transmutation, and it's taking that sexual energy and channeling it into another form of work. And I've heard about this in so many different podcasts and interviews, where it's like at peak desire for sexual intercourse or whatever it may be as a man, like there's so much energy within that I believe actually Russ talked about this, one of the musicians.
Yeah.
And it's like throughout that peak, when you're making a decision, like, do I go watch porn or do I go on the apps and scroll for hours? And then, taking that, it says transmutation is defined as the process of being changed into another form. Sexual transmutation is therefore when the sexual energy specifically is changed into another form. You see, the sexual energy is a very raw and dense form of energy that is produced and contained in the sex center of your being. And you can become so efficient and productive if you learn how to channel that energy and bottle it up, when instead of just get addicted to the release and then you're chill and you're kicked back and you're relaxed. And I think there's a power in that I've tried to apply in terms of
in self-improvement.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, okay,
for sure.
Have you done any studying and any deep dives into this and been practical about trying to embrace this? Because I've heard a lot of the same stuff from friends who I really respect.
Yeah.
That is a very useful kind of tool that you really, I mean, it's part of the reason why boxers, don't release for a while before they go into a fight, is that's a
thing.
Yeah.
I've heard that, but I've also heard the opposite, where they're like,
no, I think
MMA fighters are like, I don't care.
It's so funny.
Maybe some of them don't care, but I think it is a thing. I mean, it was a thing.
Yeah, it totally is. It's so funny because I don't follow boxing really at all, but Jake Paul, makes this big splash in the boxing world. When he lost his last fight, he was like, guys, I had a wet dream 2 nights before, and I was channeling all this energy.
I heard that.
And I don't know if he was being serious or not, but I know that is a real practice in a boxing and fighting, in terms of channeling that energy.
Just abstain, build up as much testosterone as you can. Yeah, interesting.
Well, it's I mean, it's like you're saying, you get addicted to the release. I mean, there is a very different, my wife laughs at me because it's true, but it's I'm a very different person, before we make love and then after. I'm I go from anxious and oh my God, we got to do this and we got to do that. And then it's just after
everything's
we make love,
okay.
I'm just honey, I love you.
Yeah.
I love you so much. And she's like, oh my God, look at you. You're like a different person.
Oh my God.
So
is that different for her versus you?
Oh, she can barely walk after we're having. Is that what you're getting at? No. No.
Do women have post-nut clarity? Do
I
women have that? Is that a thing?
Yeah, I think so. For sure. Yeah. Post-nut clarity, is that what it's called?
Yeah.
Oh,
That's
that.
Write that down. Name next EP. That's the name of the next EP. Post-nut clarity.
Post-nut clarity.
Oh my God.
Well,
I think we have one more.
We have one more.
Yeah.
About sugar.
Yeah.
Right.
This is where I'm most addicted. Oh Jesus.
I didn't learn anything about sugar. I didn't have time. We were making music like crazy, but no, that is actually the one that I did want to learn a little bit about, because I'm sure that there are pretty incredible, things about what sugar is, what sugar does to your body, right?
There's probably a whole episode on that.
I'm sure there's a whole episode on it. Yeah. I do remember one thing that I saw a long time ago. There was a comedian. Was it the guy that smokes a bunch of weed and he's I smoke a bunch of weed and he's in those movies? White guy, blonde kind of hair, super stoner guy. Brewer, something Brewer was his last name.
I don't know.
Anyway, I saw him on a talk show. Wife had cancer, and he goes, one of the things that I learned about cancer is that sugar is jet fuel for cancer. He was we just we cut that out of our diet right away. That was cut out. That was what nutritionists were telling us to do and all that stuff. So is
it a specific type of sugar? Because
I
carbs
don't know.
break down to sugar, right?
No, I mean
carbs break down, but there's types.
Please forgive me for speaking out of just this is my armchair expert version of it. But I mean, yes, but there is a very big difference between simple sugars and complex sugars. So it's if you get the sugar that you get from an orange will be processed in your body very different than if you just snorted a packet of sugar off the table at your local diner.
Or high fructose corn.
Or remember
milkshake,
the fun dips that we used to remember?
Oh my
Do you remember
God.
that?
Oh my God.
Literally dipping it in sugar and eating that. That is
growing up.
Pop Rocks.
Oh my God. It's insane. It's truly insane.
Dunkaroos. Anything that you could dunk into is basically pure sugar that you're.
I grew up eating a lot of sugar, addicted to candy, gummies, and I was never overweight. I never dealt with that aspect of it, but yeah, growing up in an environment where my family wasn't aware and didn't really take healthy eating serious, I quickly, really the last 5-6 years, especially being in LA, my girlfriend's vegan, learned so much about health, and I try to cut out personally any added sugars. At times, yes, I'll have added sugars, but I have a sweet tooth, but just I think it's so easy to not be educated about it, and all the food out there. I mean, it's packed with sugar, and that's what they want you to eat, and it gets you addicted to that, right? So, what is your guys' relationship with sugar specifically?
So I'm a foodie. I love like sweet things. But I do have some discipline around it. Like, if it's in my house, I'll eat it. So if I'm at the grocery store and I break and I get a pint of ice cream, I'm gonna eat that pint of ice cream.
I'm the same way.
Yeah, for sure.
But if I have discipline when I'm grocery shopping, I'm good. Like if it's not there, I won't eat it. It's not like I crave it. I'm like, I have to go to the store right now.
Yeah.
But I do love sugar. And but I think we all go through like, moments in life where maybe we're stressed and we'll like, eat a little bit more or snack on food, or, the opposite where we'll say, we don't need it. And so I find my relationship is that I'll kind of, it's like a scale. I just kind of seesaw back and forth on how much sugar I have.
Yeah. Yeah. I've been pretty good with sugar, actually. I do binge on it though.
Yeah.
Like I will, if I go to pick up my boys from my mom's house when she'd been babysitting, and I know my mom always has ice cream in the fridge, like I'll go over there and I'll just
you got an ice cream thing. I learned this in Nashville. You love ice cream.
I grew up eating.
By the way,
like
me too.
Probably a pint like every night. I mean,
God! Oh wow!
Like I grew up eating so much.
Were you
ice
ever
cream.
overweight ever? You worked out.
No.
You were always surfing and doing.
Well, I was always, when you were
active.
young like that. I'm talking when I was, like teens and 20s and stuff like that.
So you're just burning a million
But
calories.
I've always been burning a lot of calories. But no, I mean, from what I can understand, from what I know, ice cream has never really done much of a weight thing, but it does. But what I have noticed for sure is that eating sugar, just eating in general, actually, too late at night, but especially if you eat ice cream, I don't sleep well, and I can wake up with a hangover. Like if I eat ice cream at night and then like I wake up the next day like, God, why am I mean, sometimes you'll be like sweaty in the middle of the night. You wake up the next day with a headache. I mean, sugar will really affect you almost in the same way that like alcohol will.
Yeah.
So I try to avoid that. I will binge on sugar every once in a while, and I do love sweets, but I'm not like a huge candy person. I'm not even like a huge cake person or anything like that. Like
what's
it's
the
ice
vice?
cream. It's ice cream.
Ice cream.
That's my
specific flavor.
Ice cream, and then I love maple syrup. But I don't really eat that many.
Is there a little Canadian in you?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Oh my God.
As a Canadian, I respect it.
Is there a best ice cream spot in Malibu?
No, there's a good spot. There's a company that was making this. Strauss Creamery. They make like yogurts and stuff like that now. Well, for a little, they got into ice cream. Now they're like too blown up with the ice cream. But when they just started to get into ice cream, they were making vanilla and chocolate, and that was it, in like these big tubs. And it was the best ice cream I've ever had in my life. It's so good.
Love that.
So I'm definitely an ice cream critic. I love certain types of ice cream, but I also, another like little tidbit of information. There's this guy in Hawaii who is the man. And he's like ripped. He's like, in his 50s or something like that. And the guy's just like got not an ounce of fat on him, and he's just like super ripped, right? And I was like, you must like, how are you eating? Like, you don't do, you don't look like that unless you're like, really watching what you got a plan in your mouth. Like you're, he's like, oh no, I pretty much eat anything. I was like, really? And he's like, well, it's just like a balanced diet and stuff. And then at one point, either in that conversation or later, he said, I don't know how Japanese people don't have diabetes. They eat so much rice.
Rice is all.
And I was like, wow, interesting.
Yeah, isn't that all just sugar?
Right. So what it made me realize with him is that he's very aware of just simple carbs in general. Bread should not go in your body. I mean, there's sugar, like refined sugar, which is just like you probably should not eat it. You probably shouldn't be eating Fruit Loops in the morning and all these other things, like the ways they sneak sugar into your diet, right?
The high fructose corn syrup.
Yeah, don't drink Coca-Colas. Don't drink sugary liquids, stuff like that. You stay away from a lot of that stuff. You're getting a good way there. But, then the next kind of tier is, how do I stay away from simple carbs? So it's like bread, pancakes, waffles, even
those are all the
rice,
best carbs, though. Come
that
on. I got to draw a line somewhere. I love bread. I'm not getting rid of that.
Totally.
I can't do it.
Do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there is a balance. What I found is
I'll be looking like Coppin when I'm in my 50s out
right.
there in Hawaii.
Right.
While you're eating your bread, while you're buttering up your toast.
I'm a big bread guy, but I try to cut out. My girlfriend Jacqueline no bread, like barely any carbs. That's like her family.
So she's probably pretty hip to that.
Yeah, like it's the lettuce wraps instead of a burrito.
She's literally like a
burger.
Michelin level chef, though. Like I see the meals that you're eating.
Tortillas. I mean, it's true.
I'm cooking for myself, so
when you start to realize like tortillas are, that's a lot of bread. That's a lot of just really simple. I mean, it's just flour. It's just like white powder.
Yeah.
I mean, you really shouldn't. You should try to avoid things that start out as like a white powder, right? Like sugar. Really, it's not really a powder, but it could be powdered sugar. Flour, things like that.
Rice though.
Well, I mean, I eat rice. I like sushi, right? So I'll eat rice.
Great.
But probably ever since my buddy Coppin said that, I've like limited it. I'm not gonna like just make a meal out of like a big bowl of rice, or I'll take like a little bit less of a serving underneath the vegetables when I'm eating stuff like that. Maybe just not as much.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I also there is. I don't know how hip you are to the Gundry diet. I have some people that are super into it.
I've interviewed Stephen Gundry in my podcast.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah. Plant Paradox.
I haven't heard about it.
He's a no rice guy.
Yeah, he's incredible. Gut bugs, that whole conversation.
You haven't heard about it? Yeah, there's a book called
Tell me.
The Plant Paradox that talks a lot about. He's basic. I mean, you've interviewed him more, so feel free to.
Jacqueline put me onto him.
Chime in, but
so what'd you learn from him? What was his?
It was a while ago, and I don't want to butcher anything, but that's his whole thing. Is like.
Plants are chemists,
yeah.
right? Plants naturally, that's their defense, right? Yep. Like tigers have teeth. She's got fangs, my dog. Plants, the only thing they have is their chemical compounds. And some things want to be eaten, some things do not want to be eaten. So he's kind of like gone in and figured out that plants use this protein called lectins that are in different types of plants. And in higher amounts, some in higher amounts, some in less. And so he's basically developed like an eating plan around trying to avoid lectins. Yep. Like for instance, I think it's something like if you ate
very
like,
well said, by the way. All the memories are coming back.
If you eat a small amount of like just kidney beans raw, you'll die. Yeah,
really?
It'll spunk you up. That's what I heard. We'll see.
So what are some plants that are high in lectins?
Or just beans in general? Beans have high lectins, and so Gundry, he's like not a bean guy unless you pressure cook them, unless you like cook them at very, very high temperatures, because that cooks the lectins out. So things can be cooked out of it. He goes. There was this thing about tomatoes, right? We think when you think of Italy, you think of tomatoes, right? You're like, oh, the pastas and the pizzas and all that stuff, right? Well, tomatoes were never in Italy until they were brought there from the Americas. Tomatoes were native to the Americas, not to Europe, right?
Okay.
So it's a relatively new food for even a place like Italy. Now, how did they prepare it in Italy? They didn't just like chop up, start making like caprese salads and stuff like that. They did pizza, pastas. They realized that if you took out the seeds and you took out the skin and if you cooked it, then it was digestible, because initially it was making them really sick.
Oh,
and so they developed ways to use, tomatoes and the flavoring of tomatoes without all the lectins, just naturally, right?
Interesting. So one thing that I remember reading, and I don't want to, again, this is just armchair stuff. I remember reading about super centurion societies, basically
blue zones and stuff.
Yep. Yeah, where societies where there's a much higher percentage of people who live to be 100 years old or higher.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the key things that all of them had in common was the consumption of beans.
Mm-hmm.
So that sort of, I don't know, I'm sure they're cooking them. I don't think they're eating raw beans, but
I know a lot of people that give him a lot of flack for his things, because at least in the beginning, he was also kind of saying like a certain amount of meat is okay and stuff like that. There were a lot of like vegans and people that were plant-based that were just kind of like, don't buy into all that stuff. Like you kind of need a broad array of plants.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's possible. But that also could be, there's so many other factors when you deal with the centurion stuff. I mean, like, beans. But that means that they're probably not eating that much meat, because beans are a big part of their diet. Therefore, they're probably eating mostly plant-based, which is another very good thing for longevity, if that's what you're going for.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of other factors, but it's just something to look into. I don't really eat Gundry, but one of the things I brought him up because rice. He doesn't eat rice. That's not his thing. He's like, whenever I have people that I'm up with that are eating Gundry, they don't eat rice. They replace it with like other grains like quinoa. That's why quinoa, those things kind of were on the rise, because people were trying to swap out rice for a grain that was more easily digestible.
Interesting.
And it's all about gut health. His thing. It's like you have this symphony.
That's big.
Symphony of it's when you eat, like, let's just say a tomato or beans or something, what it's doing is causing an inflammatory response too. So it's like all about lowering inflammation, improving the complexity of the gut bugs and the healthy gut bugs in your gut, and eating in a way that supports that.
So never eat sugar. Oh, God.
Yeah, sugar's probably not a fun dip. Not on his.
Don't eat the fun dip.
Don't
eat the fun dip. Well,
I love it.
I'm gonna have to indulge in my chocolate every once in a while here.
I think this was pretty fun, huh?
This
was
so
great.
I think this is a good camps.
That was a great one.
Yeah, we might have to just kind of keep coming back to it, and hearing about your cold turkey caffeine.
Oh my God. Oh yeah.
Well,
we'll see how
would
that
you say
plays out.
the end result of all this is camps in anything in moderation is probably,
I would say if you're doing any of these things chronically, you should look at your life and see if there's any of these things, including tobacco, could be on the list as well. If you're doing any of these things chronically, they're just not going to lead to good things.
Right.
If you're drinking coffee every day, probably not a good thing. If you're drinking alcohol every day, or even a few drinks a week, there's a lot of studies that say that even that amount is just really not good for you.
Yeah.
If you're watching, porn 6 times a week, probably not a good idea. If you're watching porn while you're driving down the highway, then,
not good.
Not a good idea. And marijuana, you're smoking every day, not a good idea. It's just, and I do agree with the whole emotional growth thing. I think that if you're smoking marijuana every day, there are things that you are not processing in your life that you really should. It is a bit of an escape. Yeah. And it allows you to just kind of ignore some other kind of big important things, and it can really affect your sleep as well. Yeah. And then sugar, you're gonna develop diabetes, man. If you're eating sugar every single day and stuff. I mean, it's so prevalent in our society, and it's just something that is it's really messed up, actually. How many things just sugar, and
it's just cheap to produce.
Yeah, it is. Well, there's we'll get into it another time, but the things that are cheap to produce also could potentially be byproducts from other things that are produced. Like, for instance, you go to make corn, and then like the husks that they were just throwing all that stuff away. They're like, what if we just like compressed the shit out of this stuff and made an oil, and then there you go, canola oil. Yeah. So they figured out ways to sell their trash, essentially, in the form of something else. And then that's how we end up. A lot of the oils that we have, the oils that are really, really bad for you, that's how they came to be. It's their way of making money off of their trash, essentially.
Yeah. Capitalism.
Capitalism, baby. But people like us, you don't have it without the checks and the balances, right? Like, you got to have people that question the system, question what we're doing, and hold people accountable. Hold companies accountable, educate the public about what it is that's going on. I mean, you can either be somebody that just, goes along with all this stuff, or somebody that speaks up and tries to make a difference.
Yeah.
And ask questions.
It all starts with questions.
It does. It does.
Yep.
Awesome.
Good.
Well, I think this is a great episode 1.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah, me as well.
Incredible.
Yep. Thanks for joining us. Thanks, Vinayak, for engineering this episode. You're the man, and sitting through our BS here. And Onyx, of course, the mascot.
Yes.
Thank you, Onyx. We'll see you for episode 2.
Let's do it.
There you go.